To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
It was August 18th, 1983 in Tampa, Florida. 19-year-old Barbara Grames was walking home from her job at the mall. She never made it. The next morning, her body was found behind a dental office. She'd been beaten, sexually assaulted, and on her cheek, investigators thought they saw a bite mark. That single piece of so-called forensic evidence would change the course of a young man's life. Police focused on 18-year-old Robert DuBoise, a local kid with no connection to Barbara. But when a forensic dentist claimed his teeth matched the mark on her skin, it was enough. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to die, all because of a bite mark that decades later turned out not to be a bite mark at all. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 306, The Story of Robert DuBoise. On the night of August 18th, 1983, 19-year-old Barbara Grames clocked out of her job at the Tampa Bay Mall in Tampa, Florida. She worked at one of the mall's fast food restaurants, the Hot Potato, a place she could earn money and occasionally slip her friends some free French fries. It was a little after 9 p.m. when her shift ended. She was tired but in a good mood, ready to walk the short distance home. At the time, Barbara had recently moved out of her parents' house, and she was living with 3 male roommates and one of their friends in Riverside Heights. The route home felt very familiar to her. She had done it a lot, and it wasn't far. But somewhere along the way, she vanished. The next morning, Barbara's body was found behind a dentist office about 2 miles away from the Hot Potato. 2 friends would later tell police they saw her walking on North Boulevard at 9:30, just a few blocks from her house, but by then, several blocks south of the dentist office. So that led police to believe she might have decided to get a pack of cigarettes at one of the convenience stores around the intersection of Buffalo Avenue and North Boulevard. The crime scene itself was awful. Barbara was lying on the ground, completely naked except for her tube top. She had been beaten and she was covered in blood. She also had bruises on her arms that looked like they were made by the pressure of her attacker's fingers. It was a very brutal murder. Right away, detectives from the Tampa Police Department cornered off the scene. They photographed the area, collected samples, and took impressions from the ground. Early reports described blunt force injuries to Barbara's face and head, but one particular mark would eventually stand out, a small bruise on her left cheek that investigators thought looked like a bite. At the scene, investigators found several pieces of 2x4 lumber spattered with blood and hair, believed to be the murder weapon. They also lifted fingerprints from a nearby air conditioning unit as well as Barbara's wallet. Lead detective Philip Salandino noticed a pale circle on one of Barbara's fingers, suggesting she had recently worn a ring. But no ring was ever found, and witnesses later gave conflicting accounts about what kind of ring she owned, or whether she had even been wearing one that night. Much more on that later on. 2 days later, Dr. Lee Miller, the Hillsborough County medical examiner, performed the autopsy, and he concluded that Barbara died from blunt force trauma to the head around 11:30 p.m. on August 18th. So she was killed about 2 hours after she clocked out of her job. As part of the autopsy, Dr. Miller collected standard forensic evidence: hair and blood samples, fingernail scrapings, and a full sexual assault kit that included a sample of white fluid. But while cleaning Barbara's face, he noticed what appeared to be a bite mark on her left cheek. So he swabbed the area for possible saliva, and then he called in Dr. Richard Powell, a local dentist listed as a forensic odontologist, even though he had no formal certification. This was Powell's very first criminal case. Powell photographed the mark and told Dr. Miller that it might have been left by someone missing a front tooth. Then after that, a few days later, a portion of Barbara's cheek was removed. At this point, Tampa police then consulted Dr. Richard Souveron, a well-known forensic dentist from Coral Gables, who advised them to collect bite impressions from potential suspects using beeswax molds. Detectives reportedly made dozens of these impressions, possibly up to 100. And when Dr. Souveron examined the preserved tissues weeks later, he agreed that the suspect could have missing or crooked teeth. This single piece of information essentially led the police down the road right to their suspect. Very early on in the investigation, Detective Philip Salandino interviewed a woman who worked at a convenience store near the crime scene months earlier. She didn't know Barbara Grimes, but mentioned a few men who used to hang around the store and sometimes caused trouble. Guys that she knew only as Ray, Robert, and Bo. She also pointed police toward a nearby house where she thought they stayed. And inside the mailbox, detectives found mail addressed to the DuBoise family. A simple background check revealed two brothers, Victor and Robert DuBoise. Robert was 18 at the time and had a couple minor nonviolent offenses. When Detective Salandino met with him in late September, Robert immediately agreed to cooperate. He told the detectives he heard that police were collecting bite impressions and said that he had nothing to hide. He was sure that he could prove that he wasn't the one who bit this girl. Except 39 days later, he would be arrested for it. Robert's parents told investigators they believed that both of their sons, Robert and Victor, were home on the night of August 18th. If they had gone out, they said it was only to look for their sister, who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. Otherwise, they would have been at home with them. When it came to Robert's teeth, he didn't have any missing or crooked teeth, but he agreed to provide a bite impression anyway. So a beeswax mold of his teeth was sent to Dr. Richard Souveron, the forensic dentist in Coral Gables. And when this doctor compared the cast to the photograph of Barbara Grimes' cheek, he concluded that Robert's teeth matched the alleged bite mark, even though he didn't have any missing front teeth. Fast forward to October 22nd. Police located Robert at a nearby motel and asked him to come down to the station. But instead of being questioned anymore about the crime, he was put in handcuffs. Robert was arrested and charged with murder and attempted battery, despite there not being any other physical or forensic evidence linking him to the crime. He was arrested. Less than 24 hours later, a second mold was done, this time using sturdier material. And once again, Dr. Souveron insisted it was Robert DuBoise who had bitten Barbara Grimes. Although Robert was 18 at the time of his arrest, he was still very much a kid. He didn't have any real idea about what was actually happening to him. He didn't even know who the victim was, the woman that he was now accused of murdering. And it felt like months before he actually met with his court-appointed attorney. Robert went from being an average 18-year-old kid to now being accused of one of the worst possible crimes that a human could commit. And when I say he was just an average guy, he really was. Born in 1965 in Tampa Bay, Florida, Robert grew up in a typical all-American working-class family. He had always been a hard worker. At just 8 years old, he started mowing neighbors' lawns so that he could bring home a little extra cash. But on the other hand, school just wasn't his thing. He had dropped out his sophomore year, but he knew how to fix almost anything with his hands. So after leaving school, he made money by building or repairing things. This was something that Robert learned from his dad, who used to be a handyman before becoming paralyzed after a workplace accident. I was his hands, Robert said in an article by the Tampa Bay Times. We couldn't pay someone to fix things. By all accounts, Robert was very close to his family. He had a brother and 4 sisters. And starting from the age of 14, he did pretty much all of the driving. When Robert was 17, he had a few run-ins with the police. A cop caught him and a friend stealing gasoline out of a parked car in a Braden apartment complex. It wasn't anything too serious. But he never denied doing it or even tried to lie to the police. He fessed up right away and took responsibility. Other than that, he didn't have too much trouble with the police. His mom, Myra, was more worried that he'd start hanging out with the wrong crowd or start doing drugs, but that never happened. Besides a few things here and there, Robert was always a good kid. This was, by far, the biggest crime he had ever been accused of committing: murder and attempted assault. It doesn't get any more serious than that. If he was found guilty, he was looking at either the death penalty or life in prison. While Robert was in jail awaiting trial, a few inmates started talking. They ultimately became jailhouse snitches against him. One of them was another inmate named Claude Butler, who was being held in the same jail on very serious charges: kidnapping, armed robbery, and assaulting a police officer. Both he and Robert were housed in the jail's mental health unit due to psychiatric concerns. After living together for a few months in jail, Butler approached detectives with some information. He said Robert had confessed in taking part in Barbara's assault and murder, along with his brother and another man named Raymond Garcia. Now, the police never charged either of those men, but Butler's statement would become a key part of this case. Something else interesting: soon after giving his statement, Butler reached a plea deal on his own charges, reducing his potential life sentence to just 5 years in prison. It was a pretty sweet deal from his perspective. Then there was another witness, another informant, a woman named Joanne Suarez. She claimed that Robert had once told her that he killed someone and that she may have seen him wearing a ring similar to the one that Barbara was believed to be wearing the night that she was killed. But if you recall from earlier, there's a lot of dispute about whether or not she was actually wearing a ring that night. So at this point, the police feel really good about their case against Robert. They had forensic experts say that his teeth matched the bite mark impressions found on the victim's face. And now they have 2 potential witnesses who basically said he confessed to it. From their perspective, it was a slam dunk case. Lock him up and throw away the keys. 16 long months later, Robert went to trial in February 1985. And as you'd expect, the prosecution's case relied heavily on 2 things: the alleged bite mark on Barbara's cheek and the testimony of those 2 informants. Let's start with the state's forensic evidence, the bite mark. Dr. Richard Souveron, the state's forensic dentist, testified that the bite mark matched Robert's teeth to a reasonable degree of dental certainty, which is exactly what you want your forensic expert to say. You can't say anything is with 100% certainty. It's usually within a degree of reasonable certainty. And in this case, it's within a reasonable degree of forensic dentistry certainty. For the state, they were very happy to have someone like Dr. Richard Souveron. He was the same expert who testified about bite mark evidence in the serial killer Ted Bundy trial. He's also testified in a handful of other bite mark cases over the years. So if they wanted an expert on forensic dentistry, he was probably the best person you could get. But there were some serious issues with his testimony. The first was that he never got to examine the actual bite mark. That's because the formaldehyde that it was preserved in had actually shrunk it from its original size. So he was only able to look at a photograph of it. That's problem number one. The second issue came under cross-examination. On cross, the doctor admitted that months earlier, he told a group of police chiefs, quote, "If you tell me that's the guy who did it, I'll go into court and say that's the guy who did it," end quote. Now, if that's true, it sounds like the police and now prosecutors just wanted to pin this on Robert because they didn't have anyone else. If they needed this forensic expert to say that it was Robert's teeth, well, then that's what he would do. Well, on direct, Souveron suggested that the defense took this statement completely out of context. He still stood behind what he said about the marks matching Robert. So the defense called its own expert, Dr. Norman Spurberg, chairman of the American Board of Forensic Odontology's Bite Mark Guidelines Committee. He testified that Robert should be excluded as the source of the mark, noting several inconsistencies between his teeth and the injury. Simply put, the marks didn't add up. There was no way you could take Robert's teeth and line them up with the marks on Barbara. They just didn't line up, no matter how you positioned them. But beyond the disputed bite mark, Robert's defense argued that there was zero physical evidence linking him to the crime. And not only was there zero evidence, some of the physical evidence at the scene actually pointed away from him. Here's what I mean. Several strands of hair were lifted from the victim's body, yet they weren't a match to Robert. The hairs didn't come from him. Second, fingerprints were lifted from an air conditioning unit that was near the body, as well as from Barbara's wallet. None of them matched. They also didn't match Robert's brother, Victor, or their friend, Raymond Garcia, the other two alleged suspects. So none of the forensic or physical evidence at the crime scene matched Robert. And even more true, most of it suggested he was actually innocent, and the murder had been committed by someone else. Someone else who wasn't on trial for their life. Everywhere you look right now, people are talking about weight loss medications. It's the buzz at brunch, your group chats, and even at your doctor's office. But do you know if weight loss medications are right for you? Enter Hers. Weight loss by Hers is realistic, not restrictive. Hers provides access to affordable weight loss plans built around oral medication kits and GLP-1 injectable options. With oral medication kits starting at just $69 per month with a 10-month plan when paid up front. Whether you want to lose weight, grow thicker, fuller hair, or find relief for anxiety, Hers has you covered. Visit forhers.com/tales to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's forhers.com/tales. forhers.com/tales. Weight loss by hers is not available everywhere. Compounded drug products are not approved or evaluated for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for full details, important safety information, and restrictions. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased. So that was the state's forensic evidence against him. They had one expert say that the bite mark matched Robert's teeth to a reasonable degree of dental certainty. There wasn't a single fingerprint found at the scene, not a strand of hair, no shoe or footprints, no blood, no semen, nothing at the crime scene matched Robert. So if he committed this murder, the only piece of forensic evidence he allegedly left behind was this bite mark. Now, the second part of the state's case, the two informants. Joanne Suarez, or Josie, took the stand for the prosecution. She called Robert a friend, but also said she thought he had a crush on her. She said that he'd bragged about fighting and killing and that she's seen scratches on his chest and on his back. On another occasion, she swore she saw the victim's ring on his finger as if he was holding onto it like some type of trophy. Next up was Claude Butler. He took the stand while wearing jail clothes because by then he was serving time for robbery and kidnapping. He was the one who testified that he and Robert were, quote, good friends and that Robert had confessed. He claimed that the two of them sat together watching television on Christmas Day 1983 while in jail, and that's when he said he committed the murder. In Butler's version of events, Robert had been riding around, drinking and getting high with his brother Victor and their friend Garcia. They were short on money, so the men tried to steal Barbara's purse, but she recognized Garcia. So they then threw her inside of their car and eventually killed her. Now, for Robert's defense, his attorneys argued that Butler had made the whole thing up. They weren't good friends, they just lived in the same cell block. And Butler had every reason to make up a false confession. If he became a star witness for the prosecution, he would receive a reduced sentence in his pending case. That's exactly what happened. Instead of getting a life sentence, he only served a handful of years in prison. So that was it. That was the state's entire case. Despite the weak forensic evidence, they emphasized the scientific certainty of the bite mark in closing arguments. And from then, it was game over. On March 7th, 1985, the jury convicted Robert of murder and attempted sexual battery after a day and a half of deliberations. They recommended life in prison, but the judge overruled that recommendation and sentenced him to death. It all came down to the bite mark. From that moment on, he became the newest of more than 200 men awaiting execution in the state of Florida. But throughout everything, he maintained his innocence. He said he had nothing to do with this. He wasn't a killer. So through his attorneys, he immediately filed an appeal. This wasn't just about a murder conviction. It was also his life. If he didn't get this right, he was going to be executed for a crime he didn't commit. On appeal, his lawyers argued that the dental impressions taken after his arrest were obtained illegally, and that any statements he allegedly made to jailhouse informant Butler shouldn't be allowed in court because Butler was acting as an agent of the state. They also challenged the judge's decision to override the jury's recommendation for life in prison. No one on that jury wanted this man executed. But 3 years later, the Florida Supreme Court rejected nearly all of their arguments and upheld the conviction. For the next 20 years, life for Robert looked like this. He woke up every day alongside 96 other death row inmates, not knowing if it would be his last. He did things like wash his socks in the sink. His toilet constantly ran. Other inmates yelled or screamed most nights. He lived the kind of life you'd expect if you were on death row for murder. Except Robert's story was different. He was actually innocent. By 2006, he had been locked up for 21 years. He was 41 and had spent more than half of his life in prison. And by this point, he was ready to try something new. He requested DNA testing. But there was a problem. He was told all of the biological material had been destroyed back in 1990. So the court denied his motion to test the items, arguing that even if DNA excluded him, it wouldn't prove innocence. Since prosecutors claimed multiple attackers were involved. Strange, right? They claimed 2 other attackers, Robert's brother and their friend, but neither one of them was ever charged in the case. Another decade passed. That's when the Innocence Project took on Robert's case. And one of the first things they did was uncover key information that had never been disclosed, including that jailhouse informant Claude Butler's 5-year sentence had been reduced to just 13 months. Yes, he was originally facing a life sentence and only got 13 months behind bars. They also discovered that another witness, a witness we haven't even talked about yet, a guy named Jack, had been working closely with prosecutors on an unrelated murder case at the time of his testimony. So he was another informant who stood a lot to gain. When Andrew Warren was elected Hillsborough County's new state attorney in 2016, he created a conviction review unit, CRU. And in 2019, the CRU reopened Robert's case to examine the reliability of the forensic evidence. By then, bite mark analysis had been widely discredited. The National Academy of Sciences and the American Board of Forensic Odontology had both concluded there was no scientific basis for identifying suspects through bite marks. It became what many people would call junk science. In Robert's case, Dr. Adam Freeman, a modern forensic odontologist, re-examined the evidence and found serious problems. The tissue had been preserved in formaldehyde, distorting it, and the beeswax molds used for dental impressions had likely warped. Most importantly, wait for it, he determined the mark on Barbara's cheek wasn't even a bite mark at all. Yes, you heard me correctly. The key piece of forensic evidence against Robert, the bite mark, wasn't even a bite mark at all. But that's not all. In August of 2020, the CRU's supervising attorney discovered that 3 microscopic slides from Barbara's original rape kit had been preserved since 1983. And when DNA testing was done, it revealed 2 male profiles. Neither one of them belonged to Robert. He was officially excluded as a contributor. His brother Victor and their friend Raymond Garcia were excluded as well. But wait, there's still more. The major DNA profile matched a man already in the FBI's CODIS database, someone with no connection to Robert. So not only was there never a bite mark, now there was the DNA evidence that officially excluded Robert as the killer. The DNA at the crime scene belonged to someone else, a known offender. On August 26, 2020, prosecutors moved to reduce Robert's sentence to time served, and he walked out of prison that same day, a free man after nearly 37 years. And within weeks, his conviction was officially vacated. A year later, he filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Tampa, the detectives, and the doctor who testified against him. And in February of 2024, the city of Tampa agreed to a $14 million settlement, one of the largest in Florida, for a wrongful conviction. Then in 2022, new DNA evidence led to the indictment of two men, Amos Robinson and Abraham Scott, for the murder of Barbara Grams and another woman killed the same year, Linda Lanson. Robert DuBoise is a free man today, but freedom came at a cost no one should ever have to pay. He was just 18 years old when he was arrested, and nearly 56 when he walked out of prison. In that time, he lost his youth, his family, and nearly 4 decades of his life to a system that trusted bad science more than truth. For nearly 37 years, he lived behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, all because of a bruise that wasn't even a bite mark. This case is one of the clearest examples of how flawed forensic methods can destroy lives. At the time, bite mark analysis was considered reliable, even scientific. But decades later, it's been proven to be anything but. Human skin isn't a stable surface. It stretches, bruises, and heals. Two so-called experts looked at the same mark and came to opposite conclusions. And that single piece of evidence was enough to send an innocent man to death row. Modern forensic science has evolved. DNA testing ultimately cleared Robert's name and identified the true perpetrators. The kind of technology that simply didn't exist back in 1983. But that progress came too late for him. Yes, Robert is free, but he'll never get back the years that he lost. The birthdays, the family moments, the chance to live a normal life. And all of it because of one bad piece of forensic evidence. Cases like this remind us that forensic science can be a powerful tool for justice, but only when it's grounded in truth, tested by evidence, and applied responsibly. Because when it isn't, the consequences can last a lifetime. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to help create compelling new cases, fund research, and assist with production and editing costs, you can support the show with a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll be one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Thank you so much to this week's newest Patreon supporters, Lori B. and LQ. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Sherry A., Nicola, Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Lois B., Lynn H., Danielle D., Lucretia W., Brett R., Luz Raquel, and Courtney C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening and see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.